Okay, so first boss to go over is Kazara. Kazara is first boss dragon. It's a very simple fight. It really only has like one big mechanic that you guys have to deal with. That mechanic is the Dread Rifts. The Dread Rifts go on random players. You guys want to drop them off to a side or a specific spot. For Madlads, we're going to be dropping them on one side and then moving across the boss arena. We should have enough, because after 5 or 6 Dread Rifts on normal, we should be killing it. If there's a better strat for Heroic, then we'll implement it. And then the other mechanic that goes with the Dread Rifts when we drop the pools is the Rays of Anguish. Rays of Anguish target players, and you slowly drag the lines through the rifts, and once it gets to the rift, the beam goes away. The change for Heroic is these rifts will pretty much be, or the beams will pretty much be permanent until you take it through a rift. On normal, they do despawn after a little bit, but you still want to take them through the rifts. So the idea is we drop our rifts in a good spot, you take the rays, you run through the rift or to get to the other side, and your beam follows. And then on Mythic, our strategy will change pretty heavily, because the beams, if they touch any pools on the ground or any deactivated rifts or anything like that, they will do a huge pulse of damage. There are a couple of other abilities that are here. The Flamesteel Carnage is a big thing for healers. We do have our healing cooldown set, but whatever raid you guys are in, you guys will want to have at least one healing cooldown for every single Hellsteel Carnage. At 80, 60, and 40, it does just a big raid wipe, and there's a lot of stuff to dodge. It's pretty easy. Hellbeam, big frontal. It's very, very telegraphed, and you have a lot of time to move, so it's easy to dodge. And then the Wings of Extinction is a raid-wide knockback. This roughly goes out every 25 to 30 seconds, depending on the time of the fight, and it ramps up over time, so you want to have some form of healing cooldown for every single one of these. The big thing with the knockback is if you get knocked back into someone else's ray, it can potentially be a problem. On Mythic, if you have one of the rays and you accidentally get knocked back through a puddle, then you need to very quickly change your positioning so you don't take the beam through the puddles or things like that. But it's not too hard. You can also get knocked off the edges on this fight, so you do need to be careful with that. Khazra is very, very simple. Does anyone have any general questions about Khazra or Kazara?
Did the beams disappear over time? Not the beams, the snail trails?
No, they do not disappear over time. I believe on normal they have a disappear time. I think it's like 25 seconds. On Heroic and Mythic, they do not despawn. So
no, but the trail is created by the beams.
I believe the trail lasts forever, but I still have my game open, so we will double check just to make sure in the dungeon journal. But it should be the afterburn every second. Oh wait, no, Scorched Earth. Players standing in it, rays, Molten Star. Doesn't say anything about them despawning. So the rays, the lines that you do, yeah, the lines that you draw are there forever, and that's why it's going to be really hard on Mythic, because if you draw through like all those pre-existing lines, then you pretty much screw everyone up, and you take a shit ton of damage. But it is pretty straightforward and simple, at least for normal and Heroic. And again, Heroic, the only mechanic that changes is the rays don't despawn until they go into a rift. On normal, you can just take your sweet ass time and they can run out eventually. Kind of like the debuffs that you get on like Dathia or Primal Council, those like sparks, they like on normal you could just stand there and they'd fall off, but Heroic and higher they do not. So Kazara is pretty easy. So we'll skip on to the next boss. The next boss, there are 2 different routes you can go. You can either go Amalgamation Chamber or you can go Assault on the Zakali. From what I've seen through all of the testing and stuff, Amalgamation Chamber is going to be significantly easier, so that is where Madlads are going to go next. Amalgamation Chamber has 2 phases. You start off with a Void Ad on the left side and Fire Ad on the right side. The biggest thing is that the tanks have to be 50 yards apart. That means the teams have to split. In Phase 1, because these ads have to be split like this, there is no opportunity for taunt swaps. So as the tanks get more stacks, it is kind of a race for the healers and the DPS to kill it before the tanks just inevitably die. And we may need to use battle reses like early Mythic progression on the tank specifically in this position if they cannot stay alive. We'll have to address that as we get there, but that's pretty much the only like base important thing for the tanks other than the small mechanics that I'll go over later. Void Ad has its own abilities, Fire Ad has its own abilities, but the stacks are the big kind of thing. As you're within 50 yards of a boss, you get stacks, either Void or Fire. Their interaction, like if you have one of each, does not matter, but as they go up in difficulty, or if they go up in frequency, you start taking way, way too much damage. So at a certain time, you'll want to have the DPS and the healers of one group transfer to the other side to make sure that you can actually survive having high stack count. The testing that I did on normal, it seemed like if you had 10 stacks and you transferred the other side, it was fairly manageable as long as you had good healers. You might want to do less than that, and every stack comes out every 5 seconds. So if you do 10 stacks on one side, you switch to the other side, 10 stacks on the other. That's roughly a minute, 30-ish seconds into the fight, and hopefully by then you've phased into phase 2, and if not, you might even have to do a third switch, or maybe just move at a different stack note timing. So as we go through progression, we fill it out, we'll tell you guys how many stacks we want you to switch sides on, but again, the number one thing here is that tanks do not switch sides ever. There are 3 mechanics for each side. I'll start with fire first. Fire has a large meteor soak that everyone needs to be in for your group. It will be more important when we get into the phase 2, but as many people as possible soak it, and that's this kind of like orange circle up at the top. There are molten eruptions, which is heroic mechanic only, so I'll talk about that in just a moment. But then there's Swirling Flame. He picks a random player and launches a cone with multiple projectiles. You can dodge in between the projectiles, but the best idea is to, if it casts on you, either quickly sidestep away, that way you don't get hit by the cone at all, or back up to give yourself more space to dodge the projectiles. And then the heroic mechanic is a bunch of small personal soaks, and you need to make sure they're soaked. If we miss a single one, we're pretty much going to wipe. It doesn't do, like, raid-wide lethal damage, but it does a lot of damage. So the recommendation that I have from my heroic testing was every single time you're going to soak one, you pop a personal, and you just make sure that at least one person soaks it. Multiple isn't bad, but the biggest thing is they just need to be soaked. So having multiple is totally fine. Void side, a little bit more complicated. There are purple circles that people get with this umbral detonation. If you get it, you just run off to the side and it drops a pool. You don't want to drop the pools all in the middle because we're going to be using the middle of the room later, so try to drop it away. The Coalescing Void is this big black bomb that'll spawn at one point, and it does fall-off damage, so you have to run away from it. Also be aware that this on Heroic and Mythic does a lot more damage, and it hits everyone, so not only will the Void side need some sort of healer cooldown to catch back up, the Fire side will also need a healer cooldown once you get into that kind of progression, because it will do that much damage. The heroic mechanic for this side is Shadow Convergence. It'll target the boss specifically. It'll spawn a bunch of orbs outside, and they slowly travel in. If you touch one of these orbs, it's going to kill you. The way that I handled this on PTR and testing was pretty much be as close to the boss at all times as possible, and when the coalescing, or when the Shadow Convergence comes in, you have roughly 3 seconds to dodge it. If you want to stay far away, you can. Just note that there is a very high likelihood that it spawns on top of you and instantly kills you. So Void side is pretty melee healthy, and you want to make sure that you're, dodging those as best you can. It also, from testing, seemed to every single time a Shadow Convergence casted, right afterwards is a Coalescing Void on the spot which it collapsed to, if that makes sense. So that is through Phase 1. Does anyone have any quick questions about Phase 1? Okay, go ahead.
The Coalescing Void, does that just spawn randomly?
It spawns it spawns like fixated. Their position where they're going to collapse on is where the boss is. So like wherever this boss is where it will spawn around him. As far as these orbs, they seem to be cardinal directions, like a compass. So like north, northeast, east, etc. So obviously that's not going to be something you're going to be paying attention to mid-fight. Just know that before it casts, you want to be close to the boss so they do not spawn on top of you.
Okay.
Okay. Going into P2. So P2, when either ad hits 50%, they'll combine, they share their health pool, and all of their abilities now do double things. The biggest thing here is that if in P1 you can get both of them to roughly 50% HP at the same time, you will transition with 50% HP. If one of the ads is at 50% and you don't touch the other one and it's at like 95% because only the tank's been hitting it, it will have like 80% HP, and then this is pretty much just a wipe always. So if you don't have good DPS division, you guys might just want to call a wipe early, and then do a good DPS division to make sure that everything goes well. The first thing, the dot that you get is Shadow Flame Contamination. It does not fall off. There is no way to remove it, because it's just permanent for the rest of the fight, so at this point it's just a DPS check. This last slide has all of the mechanics on it, so it might be a little confusing, but I'll go through them one by one. The Blistering Twilight, which for the Void side was the little purple circle that people get, now also shoots the fire cone out of it. So you get targeted by the purple circle, you walk off to an edge and you drop it away because you don't want to drop in the middle, and then every single person will have to look where that pool is and dodge the incoming fire tornadoes. When we have Gloom Conflagration, this one is the Meteor Soak, so every single person in the raid will need to soak this. It will do significantly more damage if there are less people in it, and it does a colossal amount of damage, especially on Mythic difficulty. Every single person will want to be in this unless they are doing another mechanic, and when you soak it, right afterwards, it spawns the Coalescing Void, which is the thing that you have to run away from. So the idea is everyone soaks, and then everyone has to run away. Our solution for Madlads is the first one. We are going to be during Lust, so we need to make it quick. So we're going to have a preemptive lock gate set up, and we're going to take the lock gate. Past that, you'll want to have things like Wind Rush, Roars, and things to get away from it after you soak. And just remember, it does a shit ton of damage, so do not run out early. And then lastly, on Heroic only, the Convergence mechanic spawns also with the big bomb thing that you want to also deal with. So it'll be a personal soak that you have to do. There will be multiple of them around the arena. Every single person that personal soaks, there will be the orbs after they soak converge in that position. So it'll be the ranged DPS in this example runs in, soaks it, and then right as they finish, they have to run away through the gaps of the collapsing orbs. So it can be a little bit complicated, and on Heroic, it will be really bad based on their RNG positioning. If you have a couple that spawn next to each other, there might not be a good path out. On a lot of testing, people were saying just have personals if you're soaking these. Even immunities are good, because if you get a bad pattern and you can't find a safe way out, you're going to get hit by an orb, and they do about 500k damage. So just be aware that the personal soaks in P2 are incredibly dangerous, especially if they are close to each other. But that's basically the whole part of this fight. You will save Lust for this, because again, everything is just on a permanent basis as far as the dots, and you're basically just going to burn them down as fast as you can in P2. I know that might be a little confusing, but does anyone have any questions about P2 or P1? Okay, we'll go on to the next boss in this wing. The Amalgamation Chamber afterwards has Forgotten Experiments. Currently, Raid Plan does not have a good image or the correct resources for it, so I was not able to do one. So instead, I kind of pulled up the poll video from ReadyCheck poll that we have been using. The biggest thing is that there are 3 different phases, and on Normal and Heroic, you fight them one at a time, so it's pretty easy to deal with. In P1, it is very, very simple.
Pretty simple.
As far as the mechanics go, there is a large breath, and there is a roar that you have to move away, very similar to the previous boss. There is also a rendering charge, which if you have ever done Sire Denathrius, it's like the Remornia dash. You just have 3 world markers placed, 3 people stand on each world marker, and he'll dash from one person to the next person to the next person and apply a bleed. These bleeds on Heroic, the damage is significantly increased, so you will want your healers to make sure that you are spot healing these people. They'll kind of show like their rendition of it, but that's pretty much all of phase 1. Just dodge a breath, make sure that you're not in the roar, and if you get the dashes, you go over to a designated position and you do the dashes. P2 is a lot harder, and from testing, most guilds or most teams that were doing it were lusting in P2, because P2 is very hard to deal with. In P2, you can see these orbs that are here. There is a dispellable debuff. Healers, you do not dispel this instantly. If you dispel this instantly, you are trolling your raid, and you will have lots of problems with your progression. Every single time that this debuff puts on a player, it will slowly ramp up in damage over time, and eventually it will be unhealable. So before that person dies to an unhealable dot, they get cleansed. When they get cleansed, they drop a bomb like this on the floor, and at the same time, they will also spawn an ad. That ad has to quickly be killed and dealt with, and the debuff does not disappear. It will then jump to another player. So the best idea is to have one designated marker position, have all of your people with that debuff go to that position, and then have a mass dispel. As you can see, it looks pretty clean here, and also it keeps these 3 new ads in a very tight position. They can be CC'd, but they need to be dealt with quickly because as they live, they just constantly pulse rate damage. So again, the easiest strategy for this, have one world marker that you designate, you do a mass dispel, every single person switches to these ads and nukes them, and then you just continue with this phase. There is also a tank mechanic and a bunch of swirlies that you have to dodge, not super duper important, but everyone should understand that part just pretty on a basic level. When you get into phase 3, however, the dots from phase 2 do not go away, so you will still have to deal with phase 2 dots in phase 3, which is pretty hard depending on how many dots you have out, or your DPS check. The biggest thing for phase 3 is that not only are you dealing with all of the little ads and you're dealing with the bombs, you're also dealing with the new boss and his mechanic. His mechanic on PTR testing was incredibly buggy. But as far as we could tell, there are orbs that spawn, and you try to play like soccer with them and try to make sure they do not hit the boss, very similar to Mythic Razageth Storms in P3, or very similar to Halandris. As you can see here, this is the orb. Again, very buggy. Hopefully it's fixed now, but if you were hitting them, sometimes the direction would go even closer towards the boss. And that's something that a lot of teams were struggling heavily with. But you see, he hits it, and it goes backwards, and every single person basically just needs to play soccer while also dealing with the dispellable buffs, which you can see their team currently has 5 or 6 of them. There's also a deep breath, and this is one thing that teams are going to have to kind of figure out. You want the orbs to be more off to one of the 2 sides. When the deep breath happens, it'll go through middle, and then it'll pick one of the 2 side lanes. If at any point he does the deep breath and there are orbs too close like this, he will consume the orb, he will get a shield, and a damage increase for the rest of the fight. And it is very difficult to deal with. So for P3, you're just dealing with the dispels that you have at your same marker. You're having people play soccer, and you just DPS check, and hopefully that you can kill the boss before it kills you. Again, I'm sorry I don't have visual aids for it, but that is the best I could do. What's up?
Just to add, fucking invokers. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. That's fine. So, does anyone have any questions about the Forgotten Experiments? It's a pseudo council fight boss. Pretty easy mechanics as long as the team is coordinated. I think P2 will be where you want to lust again, and P3 will be pretty difficult depending on how many dots you have and dealing with the weird physics of the orbs to push back. But anyone have any questions about Forgotten Experiments?
Is that 3:15 time for the video the time for the heroic fight?
Yeah,
time on the heroic fight?
Yeah, this fight, it doesn't go just 3 minutes and 15 seconds. It will be longer. From my testing,
okay.
my kill on heroic testing in this boss was 6 minutes and 12 seconds. And again, this was just with a pug that I put together. So it was kind of a struggle. It was not fun. And again, we just struggled through P3. I think on our kill, we had like 6 people alive. So it'll be very hard to figure that out, how to optimally do these orbs. But no, the fight is not 3 minutes and 15 seconds. This is just the recap video. This video is also posted with all of these other raid plans in their respective channels in Discord. So if you guys want to look at them yourself afterwards, you're more than welcome to.
Gotcha.
Cool.
And is the time between the ads or when the ads spawn from the debuff, is that 30 seconds, a minute, minute and a half?
It's whenever you cleanse that person. So like if they get the debuff and you cleanse them right away, it'll spawn an ad. If the next person gets it and you cleanse them, it'll spawn a second ad. So you can spawn those ads in whatever frequency you want, depending on the health of your raiders. I've also found that if the people die, they will just spawn the orb and the ad on their corpse, and the debuff will then jump to a new person, if it is available. So, off of my testing, I think it was like every 20 seconds-ish is when we were doing our mass dispels or our cleanses, and we had 4 priests in the raid. So it wasn't really a problem, but it'll really just depend on the tuning of how much the dot does and if your raiders can stay alive. For example, if it picks a Ret Paladin, they don't really ever need to get cleansed until, someone else screams, I need help. So maybe you have open comms for that. Maybe you just look at health bars or set it up as best you can.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Just going to say, I'm not sure if it's Mythic only, but in the last phase when you're playing soccer with those balls, when you knock one back, you get a debuff that makes you take more damage from touching another ball. So you can't just stand there and take the hit multiple times in a row. It will eventually kill you.
Yes, that is correct. So not one person can play soccer. As you see, this POV, on their buffs, they have a lot of these blue swirls. Those, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, those blue swirls are how many times he's come into contact with one. And eventually, yes, it will just one-shot you. On Heroic, they do fall off after, I believe it's 15 seconds. If anyone is online and wants to double-check that, you're more than welcome to. But on Mythic, that debuff does not despawn. So eventually it will be like kind of a Mythic Razgeth scenario where every single person just needs to eventually go play soccer. There won't be that many balls unless the fight goes on for a very long time. But the biggest thing is that people just need to make sure that they go away. Also, it seems like immunities for hitting those balls later is probably the best option. If you have too many stacks, you pop a defensive, you run into 1, 2, or 3 times, and then you're good to go for probably another 15 to 20 seconds. But we'll have to wait and see how, again, the tuning really feels. Any other questions with Forgotten Experiments? Okay, so this is the end of the first wing, and this raid works, that has the first boss, Kazara, then it has 1 wing, it has the second wing, and then the other bosses are straight streamlined until you're done. So once you finish Amalgamation and Forgotten Experiments, you would come over to the Assault on Zakali. This is the one ad fight of the whole raid, so make sure that you are spec'd for like single target but with very heavy cleave. You start over here on the left, and then you transition into this room. The big mechanic that I'm not going to really get into just yet is this big door. If at any point this door breaks, the team just wipes, and you want to make sure that there are a bunch of ads that are spawning these platforms, so you split your raid. But at the start, you have roughly 30 seconds to just hit the boss while he's solo. I believe on Mythic that is not the case, so you do have to be aware that on Mythic you will not be lusting on the pole and not be starting like this. But once he picks a platform, both teams will split up and go to their recording sides. There are the actual boss mechanics, which there is the Heavy Cudgel, which picks the tank that he is getting tanked on, and he will do a big frontal cone. And he also, when this happens, spawns rocks. I'll get into the rocks in a few minutes. There is Devastating Leap when he transfers to the other portal, or to the other platform, and when he does it, there is not only a big circle that he lands on, but there are also like these squiggly swirl lines that you have to dodge. They're pretty straightforward. And also, Arbalest Fire just randomly shoots swirlies all over the arena as the fight goes on, so you just have to be heads up about dodging as best you can. As far as the rocks go, every single time he does that tank cone, there will be 2 to 3 rocks. It seems like 3 was the maximum when we were testing with the high raid size. Once you have a rock, you can go up and any person can click on it, and it will be a lootable item. The lootable item will give you an extra action button, and you can go over to the edge, and you can look off the edge and see ads that are slowly climbing up the pillars, and you can use the extra action button to throw the rock at the ad, killing them instantly. So if there are priority ads that are climbing up and you have rocks, you need to have those players with the rocks go over to the edge, extra action button, the one that they want to kill, and kill those ads. We'll get into which ads are the worst in just a moment, but this is a pretty big, important mechanic of the whole fight. So again, you only have a certain amount of rocks, make sure to use them on the highest priority ads, and it will be a little strange. People will have to like churn their cameras and not do damage or anything, but the rocks are way more important. There are 4 different ads. Mystics are the worst ad. They have a dispellable dot that healers need to cleanse. They have a flame shield that as they channel it, it constantly pulses raid-wide damage, so both platforms are affected. And there is a shield, once you burst it, there are interruptible casts, and it just needs to be interrupted and killed. This is the number 1 priority ad. If you have any single target focus, or if this ad is alive, you're focusing it and you're cleaving off of it. There is Obsidian Guard, which if there are no Mystics, is your new priority target. It casts pulsing damage on the platform, and in Heroic, it will shoot a beam towards a player. If anyone touches that beam, it is almost certain death for that player. So people that have it need to isolate themselves, and then they need to dodge the beam on top of no one being near them. Our plan for that is to have an actual set of markers, very similar to the Forgotten Experiments, where it's just, hey, if you get targeted by a beam, you're over at the marker, no one else should be between you and the marker, and the beam comes to you, you dodge the beam, everyone else dodges you. There's the Flamebound Hunters. They throw fire pools at players, so you just need to try to kill them relatively quick so the platform doesn't get engulfed in fire. And there is a pre-spread mechanic. The pre-spread will hit a couple people. You just avoid the pools. It's pretty simple to deal with. It's not that big of a deal. Lastly, there are just kind of these fodder ads, these wall climbers. However, the only thing that they do is they try to run to the door and break it. And as I mentioned at the very start, the door is the most important part of the fight. If wall climbers get to the door and they break the door, everyone dies. So they can just quickly be picked up by ranged DPS. The second that they get hit, they just turn and they follow whoever hit them, and you just want to drag them to the tanks or just into the cleave so they can get cleaved and killed. All of these ads can be stunned, minus the Magnum Mystics. When they have their shield, they are CC immune. That is all of P1. Does anyone have any questions about how P1 will work generally with these listed mechanics?
Will there be a good spot, not for my class, but will there be a good spot for Slappy Hands to come into play there? Or did it just come up kind of like 1 or 2 at a time?
So ads will be coming up 3 to 4 at a time in certain cases. Generally, you'll have the rocks and you'll kill the priority ads, but there are times where it'll be like 3 wall climbers will jump up at the same time, or 2 wall climbers and a hunter, or like 2 guards and a hunter, or 2 mystics in the worst cases that we had during testing, and 1 guard, which is like the absolute rotation, or the absolute worst rotation that you can get. But there are also times where it'll only be like 1 at a time if you use a bunch of rocks. So it'll try to be this dance, and people will eventually figure out like, hey, this is the optimal time, just throw all your rocks and there's no ads for a minute, and then you'll be able to hit the boss. Because again, while you're cleaving these adds down, the boss will jump between platforms, so you still get to do boss damage. And the less boss damage you do, the longer you stay in this phase, and then potentially the worse rotations you get. So there might be some counterplay of do enough single target damage to eventually skip a bad cycle or something like that. Any other questions about P1? Okay, in P2, boss will go back to the middle. He'll heal from 25, another extra 10%, so he'll be at 35% health. And then it's just a single target burst until the boss dies. There are really only two big mechanics to worry about here. There is the Flaming Cudgel, which he hits the tank with the same cone from P1, except when that happens, all raid members will get personal spread circles, so the raid just wants to be as pre-spread as possible so you don't lose damage uptime, and to make sure you don't cleave down your friends. And then on a 25-second cooldown, he'll cast Catastrophic Slam. Catastrophic Slam is a large AoE centered on the door. If no one soaks it, all of the damage goes to the door breaks, and the raid wipes. So you need to make sure as many people in it can soak as possible. On normal, everyone can soak it, and there's no repercussion. On heroic, though, it puts a debuff, making the next one deal double damage to you. So we will have to double check with some tuning to see if you just have half the raid soak, you go to the second one, the other half the raid soaks like an odd and even group, or if we need to do a certain amount of people to make sure the rotation is good, or if it's just not even a negligible amount of damage and everyone soaks every single time. It'll be wait to be seen. But it is split between everyone, so hypothetically, the more people that soak, the better. The one interesting thing from testing, immunities did not seem to work correctly. If you were immune, it would do the amount of damage to kill you, and then the rest would then go to the door. So it's not like you can just immune and take like 1,000,000 damage from it. It will do a very small amount of damage to you. So currently, there is not a very good immune strategy. We just need people to soak it. And those people, there is one overlap where he will cast Flaming Cudgel into a Catastrophic Slam, so you will need to be inside of the soak circle while being spread away from your teammates, which I didn't show here, but I feel like it's worth mentioning. Does anyone have any questions about Assault on the Zakali?
With Catastrophic Slam, the debuff, does that fall off, or is that a permanent debuff you got?
It falls off, I believe, on Heroic after 1 minute. I can double check while we're here. And then I don't think it actually despawns at all in Mythic, but we can double check. Catastrophic Slam. Once you get it on normal, there's nothing. And when you get it, there's 200% damage. It does not fall off. So you soak it once, you take 300% damage basically from the next one. It does not fall off. So once you take a Catastrophic Slam, you're going to be in serious pain. On the second one, if you don't have like a Spirit Link or an Aura Mastery, or you don't have your own personal or an immunity, you're potentially dead. If you get to a scenario where you have to take a third one, otherwise the door breaks, you just die. There's nothing more that you can do.
As a note for Mythic, it's 500% instead of the 200% on Heroic.
Okay, that's good to know as well. So on Mythic, it'll most certainly be half the raid does it, half the raid does it, and if there's a third one, everyone immunities it. And then if the boss is still alive, you just sacrifice X amount of people to make sure the door doesn't break. And if there's a fourth one, the team's just dead, it sounds like. But we'll have to see what teams do for their Mythic, because I did not have the chance to do Mythic testing, unfortunately. Any other questions?
The tank frontal, does that damage the door?
The tank frontal does not damage the door, to my knowledge. However, the tanks that I were playing with never gave it a chance to hit the door. The only thing that it mentions that can damage the door are the Catastrophic Slam and the Wall Climbers. Whether or not the journal is accurate, and if you have like your personal soaks from the cudgel, like the pre-spread, if you're standing against the door and that damaged the door, I have no clue, to be completely honest. I would just say don't risk it, in general speaking, and maybe test it like a couple weeks in just to see. But generally speaking, it seemed easiest to just have the tanks kind of near the edge and have their own space, and that gives a lot more space for everyone else to kind of be in.
Second question, can the tanks fall off?
The tanks, in fact, can fall off. In fact, any DPS can fall off here. There was a very cringe scenario where someone grabbed a rock during my testing and they jumped off the edge thinking that they, could throw it while they were off, and that was not the case. So you have to be very careful at all of the edges, including here at the tank edge.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions about Assault on the Zakali? Okay, so once you're done with Assault of the Zakali, you go next to Rashok. And Rashok is very similar to Guardians of the first one for people that did Sanctum of Domination in 9.1. There is a large circle in the middle. If the boss ever goes to the middle, he dumps his energy, and based on how much energy he has, he does, certain mechanics, or mechanics last for a certain amount of time. The other difficult part is that this middle platform can only be used 3 times. So there is a set amount of time that you can do this fight until the boss just gets too much energy, and he one-shots the raid. The first and the most important mechanic of the whole thing is Searing Slam. Picks a random player. You have 3 seconds to then go to a spot. Rashok will jump to you. He will hit you and spawn a pool. That pool you should never enter that pool, and you should get out of it right as it spawns. But that pool will then shoot kind of like a bullet hell, like multiple lava puddles outwards from its position, and you have to dodge. As the fight goes on, pools do not despawn. And that's where the fight gets a lot harder, whereas you see on the second slide, there's now 2, and there's a lot more stuff to dodge. Eventually, you'll have 20 of these in the room, and you have to dodge 20 different sets of these all shooting out their individual personal blobs. And it can be very hard to deal with. The biggest thing here, do not have Zakali don't stack the pools. These pools are spread. If you accidentally have one pool and you drop it onto another pool, he will activate the previous pool and it will basically wipe the raid. There is no recovering. So these pools have to be spread around the outside of the room or spread to whatever positions your raid decides to do them, but you cannot put them on the same positions. Otherwise, you will die. That also means, generally speaking, for raiders, do not try to finagle your way into maximizing your space. It is not worth it, because if you clip by even a pixel, everyone dies. The heroic mechanic, I will go over in just a second. But for the tanks have a tank combo that you guys have to deal with. It is 3 casts. 2 of them are either Flaming or Earthen Crush, and then the other one is the other. In this example, I have the cast sequence as being 2 Earthen Crushes and 1 Flaming. This tank that currently has it takes the first Earthen. You can see that the second Earthen is starting to cast. The other tank taunts, and then the other tank will take an Earthen, and then because it has aggro, it will then take the Flaming. The biggest thing is that if you take 2 Earthens in a row, or if you take 2 Flamings in a row, you're just dead. It just does way too much damage. Even on normal, it's not something that people were able to cheese with immunities or cleansing. It just does way too much damage. So be aware, for tanks specifically, you need to make sure that you are taunting immediately during this tank combo, and you have to be vocal with your other tank to know which debuff they have. The other thing that happens is these Doom Flames. They're a bunch of soak circles. These are personal soak circles, very similar to the Amalgamation Chambers. You just need 1 person in them each. If you miss one, though, on higher difficulties, it will certainly be a wipe. My recommendation would just be don't let them go off ever. Lastly, before we go on to the heroic mechanic, at some point when he hits 95% energy, he will cast Shadow Lava Blast. It is a very big cone. I did not even do a good enough job here showing how big it is. It is about 80% of his, sight line. So these, ranged and healers over here would probably be killed. So with this tank, it does 4 million damage. So if it hits you, you're dead. So the entire raid needs to stay close to the boss. And when he casts it, you need to dodge. And when he casts it, that is showing that he is close to being full energy. And right as he finishes the cast, the tank immediately pulls him to the center to deal with the kind of intermission damage phase that happens. Lastly, I'll go back to the heroic mechanic, which is Charged Slam. Charged Slam is a very large soak that everyone needs to do. Part of the fight, as I've mentioned before, is dealing with the boss's energy. If a single player does not soak it, he will gain a significant amount of energy. So every player, with absolutely no exception, has to soak this. I did not get to personally do it, but I heard on Mythic testing, there are scenarios where you are going to have this go off and immediately into the Doom Flames. So there is a very short window of time where people need to be running over to the Doom Flames to making sure they're soaking, but that's just something you're going to have to feel out based on the difficulty you're doing. So again, every single player needs to be in the Charged Smash, or you will mess up your timing of the fight because he will get max energy faster. That is, again, the P1, and we go to intermission, and then the fight repeats. Does anyone have any questions about the generalized part of P1?
That charge slam that everyone has to be in.
Mm-hmm.
If someone has an immunity going, will that count them as not being hit by that?
I actually am not sure. I think that's something that we could test right away the second we get there on Heroic. I would assume that it just checks if players are soaking, and if they do not soak, then he gains energy. I don't know how the coding works. My assumption is try immunities the first time and watch his energy bar. If you guys do this soak your first time on Heroic and someone immunities and all of a sudden he gains a bunch of energy, I'd say just immediately call a wipe and just tell your raiders that you're not allowed to ever do that again. It's probably a better call out anyway to use your immunities on these Doom Flames because, again, they do hurt a lot. But that would be my general call out. Any other questions with P1 of Rashok? Okay. P2, or the kind of intermission phase, he will go to the middle. He will do a very similar mechanic like the Zakali Assault, where he, pulses out all of these little swirly lines. You just dodge the swirly lines. And then there are two other abilities that happen in this phase. The first one being Shattered Conduit. Periodically, from testing, it seemed to be every 7 to 8 seconds, but that's not what the tooltip reflects, so we'll have to see what it actually is time-wise. There is a very large pulse of damage. It's something like 200k to every single raid member, and you need to make sure that every single time one goes off, people either have personal mitigation or you are actively popping a healer cooldown. I will also mention for healers, it is very difficult during this phase. If you are a healer that has a cast or a channel, like Divine Hymn on a priest, there is a very real possibility that you start your channel and there is a swirly line under your feet and you don't get to use your cooldown. And because you didn't get to use your cooldown, the raid wipes because they didn't get enough healing. So every single healer needs to be on top of their game. And this is also a very big part of personal responsibility of every raider to pop health stones, lock rocks, and use your own mitigation and things like that. On Heroic, there is also just ticking damage that passively scales up the entire time that he releases energy. So if he walks in there at 99% energy, this ticking damage gets to an incredibly high mark. So at the end of this, that is when people will need to really have personal mitigation or pop health box and lock rocks. From testing, when we were doing it and we were trying to get like 99, 98% energy, the ending ticks on Heroic were individually every 1 second hitting for about 100,000 damage. So most of the raid will die unless there are healers absolutely gassing their healer bar. So keep that aware. That is probably the hardest part of the fight, other than the Heroic Soak Slam while you're having to dodge all of the bullet hell from all the pools. Does anyone have any questions about Rashok? Okay, so after Rashok, the 2 wings are done, and then it is a straight line, the last 4 bosses of the raid. The next boss that you guys will be doing is Zaskarn. Zaskarn is kind of complicated. It is very reminiscent to Painsmith from Sanctum Domination for the people that did that fight. The first big thing, there are these kind of scales that are all around the room, and I was trying to zoom in, but I guess my thing will not let me do that. They're like these scale patterns on the floor. Each one has a small circle on the floor in the middle of it, and they're traps. Later in the fight, there will be different abilities that can activate these traps, and there are some abilities that you can do to deactivate the traps. The soften rage of this fight is when you run out of space. So eventually you'll travel all the way across the room and every single trap may be activated. Probably on Mythic you'll have 1 spot left and then the last trap will activate and you kill the boss in rage, and it'll be a pretty cool feeling. But we'll get there when we get there. Again, the traps, they pulse constant damage and they stack. So if you walk into the traps, you will have a stacking dot that hurts like a motherfucker. The whole goal is make sure that the tanks are in between 2 traps. Those 2 traps will be the ones that get empowered, and make sure that specifically the tanks and melee DPS are never in an instance where they are standing over the trap that is going to be activated, because if this trap up here where these 2 melee and this tank are activates, those 3 people will probably die. Not necessarily on normal. Heroic and Mythic, that is a much different story though. Those people will be hurting really, really bad. The way that you deactivate the traps is with these animated golems that spawn. So this is a add cleave fight. Our testing showed that they spawn every 35 seconds, and traps get activated roughly every 20 seconds. So you'll have a couple deactivates for every set of traps. You will not be able to deactivate every single trap, though. Eventually, you'll just run out. When these ads spawn, they will run across the arena, so they usually spawn in like each corner, so to speak, and they run all the way across, and they try to activate a trap. This one that I have over here to the right got to the trap, was not killed, activated the trap, and then he will then go to a new one and start to activate that. So if they are not picked up and killed, it is a very big problem. They can be CC'd, so if either team or anyone that's doing this has a DK, mass gripping works. You can grip them in, you can CC them, you can keep them all together, and it will make it very easy to deal with these ads. And when they die, very similar to the rocks on Zakali Assault, there will be an item that you have to loot. It will give you an extra action button, and when you use the extra action button on one of the activated mines, it will turn it off. So you can see here that we have a range that went and picked it up. He ran over to this trap, and he was able to use it on the trap to turn off that trap for the later parts of this fight. So if there are any bad traps, because again, 2 of them spawn next to the boss, and then a random one spawns somewhere in the arena, those ones that are really bad or in your guys' path need to be turned off as a priority. So the ones near the edge, you guys don't care about. The ones in the middle, turn those ones off. The shrapnel bombs are another thing that he throws out. They're these little metal bombs around the arena. If you walk over them, they deal an incredible amount of damage. It is possible for regular classes to just pop a personal mitigation and soak 1, but if you soak more than 1, or you take extra ticking damage from anything else, you are certainly dead. Immunities do work, so you can see that the hunter here pops Aspect of the Turtle and is able to soak, but the way that most teams seem to have the best success, the off-tank quite literally just runs around and soaks every single one. It will apply a debuff to you that makes you take more damage from the next mines, so if the tank soaks 4 of them, unless they have a very large mitigation, they will be dead. So every single time you need to find at least 1 player to soak 1 bomb in some form. From testing, it seemed like it always spawned 4 regardless of raid size, so just keep that in mind, but obviously tuning will change based on your raid size, for how much damage they deal, and as tanks get more geared, tanks might just be able to do all 4, but you only have 30 seconds. So if you have a wheelchair blood decay and they can't make it to all 4, you need to have someone be a hero and soak, even if it kills them. Having them go off will kill the raid. This picture may be incredibly complicated, and I've been asked to get these arrows out of here. At some point, the boss will cast Tactical Destruction. Tactical Destruction will activate 3 statues that are outside of the arena, so you have to actively look at the statues that are being activated. Similar to like looking at Razageth when she does her breath, or all the way back in Legion, like the dungeon Maw of Souls, where you have to watch Helia on the last boss. You have to actively be looking at which statues get activated. In this scenario, these 3 statues on this side of the room get activated, and they pulse 3 waves. The first wave is very small, where this one is, and all of them pulse it. Then the second one does a significantly larger one, and the third one does about halfway through the arena. So you will need to transition from one side of the arena to the opposite side of the arena. Also on testing, if you stand directly in the middle, it will randomly pick them. And there is a pattern where if it does like each one and then there's a gap between them, so if it picks like these 3 that I'm kind of doing a triangle shape to, the entire arena will be covered and you will wipe. So the number one thing is you have to pick a position to activate the statues, and it has to be a static position every pull. If you're activating random statues, it will be new progression every single pull, and you need to make sure you have space. So generally speaking, when Madlads do it, we're going to make sure that we are snaking up one side of the wall. We get to a corner, we activate those 3 closest statues, and then we just go to the exact opposite side of the arena, preferably with a lock gate, movement speed cooldowns, any cooldowns that you have. The casts are pretty slow, but it is lethal damage if these hit you, and that includes tanks. So you guys have to be on top of it, and you have to make sure that when you are transitioning, you're not in a bad spot where Zakarn suddenly gets to the middle and then activates 2 traps that are in terrible positions. So keep that in mind as well. Lastly, we have Blast Wave, which is a small knockback that he casts. It's not a very hardy knockback, unlike Magmarax, who we'll talk about next, but the knockback is, enough to position you between scales. If you get pushed back into one of these flame traps, because of the damage that it also does, you're probably just dead. So every single time a knockback comes out, your entire raid has to be aware of their positioning, and as you have less and less of the room, you will have to make sure that you leave an open space for people to get knocked back to. Very akin to Sire Denathrius. So that's really probably going to be the hardest mechanic, and it comes out roughly every 25 seconds. On Heroic, there is another ability that picks random players, and it puts a dot and a circle on them. These people need to spread out, and they just tick over 10 seconds. healers need to spot heal these people, and these people need to make sure that they are not running over other people. The other part that comes with this is as you're doing things like running away from the big statues when they blow up, when you're running away from traps, when you're kiting over to soak bombs, or when you are trying to, soak or kill the ads and things like that, you will have to be aware that those people probably can't participate if they're melee DPS, and they have to be spread. If people are sharing these debuffs or hitting other people, it will become almost an unhealable check. And again, these people will need significant spot healing from testing on PTR. So that's all of Zakarn. I do not have a pattern as far as the optimal way. The 2 times that I killed this boss, the patterns were completely different. But the recommendation that I would have is be snake up one side. When the statues activate, you transfer to the other side. Then you snake up a wall, and you slowly do that until all of the walls are gone, and then you just have this middle space, and you try to stay out of the middle as long as you possibly can. Does anyone have any questions about Siskarn? Okay. Siskarn afterwards goes straight to Magmarax. Magmarax is going to be the kind of like Sludge Fist, really hardcore raid wall DPS check if Rashok or Siskarn aren't. The biggest thing with this boss is that there's pool management. You guys can soak the pools, but you cannot soak the pools indefinitely, as you'll see in a few minutes, and eventually the room will just fill up. The other thing that you have to pay attention to is there is a knockback in this boss fight, and the knockback is a very, very big knockback. If you get knocked back off the edge, you're just dead. If you get knocked off into a big pool, there's a potential that you will just instantly die and things like that. So space management is absolutely key. Molten Spittle is the first ability. People will get circles on them. You want to bring them to a designated location, and you want to drop them. These pools can be soaked, and as they get soaked, they can shrink. On normal, you can completely clear these. There is no reason to not clear them on normal. It is very, very easy. On heroic, though, every single second that you are in one, you will get a stack of this debuff called Searing Heat. If at any point you exceed or hit 25 stacks, it doesn't do damage, it just instantly kills your character. So as you get higher stacks, you also soak slower. So like this person over here, they go in and soak, they have 5 stacks. At about 5 stacks, they are not going to be doing any beneficial amount of soaking by themselves. The pool will expand faster than they can soak, and that is a huge problem. So on normal, you can just soak freely as much as you want. On heroic, you will actively need to have people with low stacks or no stacks soaking, and people that have high stacks need to stop soaking, let Searing Heat fall off, and then they can continue soaking. Ignition Roar and Lava Injection are the next kind of ability that go off, and they kind of go together. There will be the Ignition Roar that goes off. It's just the raid-wide damage. It hurts a fair amount. The Heroic seems to be a fairly small jump from normal, but Mythic seems to be a very high jump, so this may be a time where you'll need personal healer cooldowns. And then every single time that he casts that Lava Injection, put circles on the ground, and they need to be soaked. This is another one of those things where if they are not soaked, your raid is probably dead, and you need to be aware of that. If you miss one, it potentially is healable, but I would say never let one go off. They only need one person each, but if someone is low HP, having a second person just to make sure they don't die is also possible. There is no downside to 2 people soaking, they just take a little bit more damage. This is the Overpowering Stomp. This is the ability that is going to kill a lot of people. The knockback, again, is significant. It's about 30% to maybe 40% of the arena is how far you get pushed back. So you want to keep Magmarax in the middle, and when you get knocked back, you'll knock back a significant distance. If you get knocked back into pools, you'll potentially start soaking multiple pools. As you see, this healer is not only soaking this one pool on the right, but it is also soaking the pool on the left because of the kind of Venn diagram that goes on. There will be a point where if you get knocked back into one of these pools, there could be 7 or 8 pools that overlap, meaning every second you get 7 or 8 stacks. If you don't run out quickly enough, you go 7 stacks, 14 stacks, 21 stacks, and you're basically dead if you touch another fire pool. So it can be literal certain death depending on how many pools have eventually grown and overlapped, and that's going to be the biggest hurdle of the fight, is not getting knocked back into magma pools or off the edge. If you get knocked off the edge, you die. If you get knocked in magma pools, you generally die. There are some classes, such as Hunters, that can use abilities like Disengage to forcefully change their velocity in air, and you can do that to make sure that you are saved. There is also some very difficult and kind of hidden tech. Before the overpowering stomp goes off, if you're standing next to a lock gate, the second that the animation finishes and your character starts to move, you click the lock gate and it teleports you through the lock gate, and you can avoid one singular stomp over the course of the fight. The stomps seem to come every 35 seconds from testing, so you will have to deal with this ability a lot, and as you eventually get to the end of the room, there will be a point where if you get knocked back, you will always go into a flame pool. So that is just something you will have to deal with based on your guys' raid and composition. So just make sure that you are aware if you're getting knocked into pools like this, you have to have some kind of good personal immunity, or you have to have a good movement speed cooldown to get out. Lastly, there are 2 other mechanics the boss does. There is a breath attack that randomly picks a player and he breathes. This is just something that you want to sidestep and dodge. And there is a tank mechanic. From what I've seen, it seems like you just want to take 1 stack and swap. However, Blood Decays were able to AMZ, or AMS, and Prot Paladins were able to just bubble it off, so there might be some way to cheat if you need to, but this fight isn't super intensive on your tanks, as far as I've seen, so you should just switch after 1 stack. So as the room slowly fills up, as you see, they'll start to get bigger, and eventually you just run out of space. This fight, from testing, seems to be about 5 minutes long, unless you're doing really, really good management with your pools. So just be aware of where you're putting them down, how you're soaking, and making sure that you guys are very vocal about soaking bad pools that are spawning in the middle of the arena. Does anyone have any questions about Magmarax? Okay. The last boss that we're going to talk about tonight in some sort of detail is Echo of Neltharion. Echo of Neltharion has undergone some pretty serious changes, so I don't have a completely accurate depiction of what he has, and also Raid Plan does not have a very good set for me to actively show you a raid plan. Instead, there is a guild called Temerity that did their progression, and I have this clip, and I will be posting this, if it's not already posted, to the Echo of Neltharion channel. The biggest thing with this boss fight is there are walls. Each one of the 3 phases have different patterns of walls. As you see, these rock walls have been created, and there are abilities that will break the walls, otherwise you cannot move through them. They also create LOS, so if you're trying to deal with adds, and on Mythic, LOS will be a very important part of the fight, but on Normal and Heroic, most of the time you just want to break the walls if you can. The first ability that comes out picks a bunch of random players. Those players, after a couple seconds, will take a knockback based on the boss's position and take a fair amount of damage. It's something that you should spot heal and make sure that you're topped off before you get hit. And as you get hit, the knockback pushes you, and if you hit a wall, you will break a wall. When walls break, every single wall that is broken will spawn a little swirly, so every single time any mechanic ever breaks a wall in this fight, people will have to dodge. On Heroic, there are these red swirlies that target players, and you just want to make sure that you are out away from the group. This will also get a little bit more complicated as people are getting knocked back. If you get knocked back into a red swirly, or if a red swirly goes off too early, you might end up killing people. Just make sure if you get a red swirly like this, you go off to the side and you drop it away from the raid. It's pretty simple. As far as the tank mechanics, there is a tank buster that goes off in both phases. However, they change from P1 to P2. In P1, it is a very, very strong hit, and you want to immediately tank swap. It also applies a knockback. That knockback can break walls, but it puts a pretty serious debuff on the current tank, and that tank needs to get taunt swapped. If they take a single melee, they will probably die. There is also the last mechanic that goes off is this very large fire pool based on the boss's position. So in P1, it will be about space management to make sure that you don't run out of space. As you slowly break walls to travel away, he will slowly burn part of the map, and you'll just never be able to go back to that part. These fire pools will disappear as you go into Phase 2, but that's really all of Phase 1 and what it has to offer. Does anyone have any questions about Phase 1?
Yeah, I just want to make sure I heard this right. Really, the biggest downside with just hitting the walls is the swirlies that spawn out of it? Or was there something else I'm missing? Okay.
Yeah, in Normal and Heroic, you can break as many walls as you want. There's really no repercussion. However, in later phases, the walls may respawn, which may cause some area denial problems. But they don't do extra damage. If you break a wall, just create swirlies. On Mythic, however, there is a mechanic that if you do not LOS a person, it will one-shot you. So there will be a bunch of, in Mythic, you can't break that wall because the person that has the debuff needs to go hide and LOS the raid. It is a little confusing. We're not going to talk about it too much, but there was really no good Mythic testing for this boss that I was able to find or do myself. So, normal and heroic, break as many walls you want, dodge the swirlies. Mythic, very big bad, we will figure it out when we get there. In P2, there is a different pattern, as before it was kind of this weird hexagon shape in the middle. Now it is a large triangle in the middle, and there are 3 distinct quadrants. Technically 4, but one of them isn't utilized. When you get into this phase, most of the abilities from P1 still exist. So these people that have Corruption, that's the knockback attack that knocks them back. You can break walls with it. And there is also this ad that spawns. This big ad has 2 big important mechanics. The first one is it has a shield. The shield needs to be broken, and when the shield is broken, it will start pulsing raid-wide damage. You need to make sure that when you break one shield, you kill the ad as quickly as possible. If you are trying to multi-dot or you send 2 groups and break 2 shields at the same time, it will certainly be a wipe for your team. The damage you will take is way too great, on top of Neltharion himself already does other abilities. On normal, all you do is you hit the ad, you cleave off of it, 2-target cleave. The ad dies, you move on to the next ad after breaking walls to the next ad. On heroic, there is a Lords of Dread kind of Among Us style mechanic that comes out, where these certain people, as you can see that warrior over there, I'll try to repause it on the warrior. The warrior now is hittable by your team. If you are spamming AoE abilities, you will be killing your friends. You need to make sure that you are only doing 2-target cleave here. If you're AoEing, you will kill your friends, and it will be very tragic. This ad, while people are hostile to each other, the only way that you can break the shield is those people that are hostile will have a debuff. Those people are the only people that can break the shield. Once the shield is broken, everyone can kill the ad. So on heroic testing, you'll see that a couple people have the debuffs. Those people are specifically targeting the ad. Once the ad shield breaks, everyone is able to hit the ad. That is only heroic. On normal, you just kill the ad, you move to the next. But on this difficulty, you have to deal with people getting pushed back through the walls. You have to deal with him channeling, Neltharion channeling, and doing a new tank mechanic. You have to deal with the red swirlies from before, all the ground swirlies, and people getting knocked back and breaking the walls. So everything kind of compounds. This phase is pretty long. It seemed on testing that some groups were willing to lust this phase. I don't think that's a smart idea. Once you see P3, you'll probably understand why. But the biggest thing is that ads need to die. The longer that you're in this phase, the more and more these ads ramp up in damage, and more Neltharion ramps up in damage. For tanks, there is a new tank mechanic in this phase that you will get. It is very similar to the previous one. It will shatter your body, and you will turn into a little ghost, and your ghost can move away from your real body. As you move your ghost away, the boss will then do a very large hit, and he will hit you towards wherever your clone is. I don't have a great representation because this is not a tank POV, but just understand if he starts to cast it on you, you need to be full health or topped off because you cannot press any of your own buttons. When your soul gets split, you run through a wall because you can run through them when you're in the ghost form. He will then do the thing where he hits your body back into the ghost, and as your body travels back to you and hits the ghost, you will break any walls that are available, and that's how you actually break a lot of the walls in P2. So again, it's a pretty serious tank buster. Make sure that you have mitigation before it goes off, and make sure that you are pretty top before it goes off, and if you're not, you need to have help from your healers. Also, I think it's fair mentioning, this is a perfect example why you don't cast AoE spells, because if you have a demo lock in your raid, all of these imps also become hostile targets, and if you're AoEing and killing all of his imps, your demo locks don't do top damage. So be very careful with your AoE here. I'm going to skip ahead.
Hey, Wise.
Yeah, go ahead.
So on that demo topic, the demonology has Hand of Gul'dan, which actually does a little bit of impact damage to everyone within 8 yards of the target. Is that going to count as AoE damage if I'm using that on the target?
Yes, it will. So the thing that you'll have to take in consideration is that, if it's 2-target cleave like this, say hypothetically your friendly neighborhood warrior gets chosen. If you're casting AoE spells, that warrior is going to get absolutely shit on. The other solution, if the warrior is getting shit on, he should heroic leap into this corner and ask for healing. He should get healed and then resume the fight. But people should have the self-control to not AoE and kill your warrior friend.
Sounds good. I think your storage is low on OneDrive, by the way.
Yeah, thanks.
There's it's one of those things.
Can that warrior be CC'd during that time frame?
Yes, they can be CC'd. You can slow them, you can stun them, you can fuck them up. There is absolutely no reason to CC in this phase. If your abilities just have innate CC, like if you're playing Frost Mage and you cast a Frostbolt and, it shatters or something and hits them and slows them, that person will be affected by the slow. Even when the effect ends, they will still be slowed. So if you, hex them, they'll still be hexed until they get cleansed when they get un-MC'd or, when they become un-aggro. If they're slowed, they still have the slow. If you're putting bleeds and stuff on them, when they become non-hostile, they still have all those bleeds, and then healers have to deal with all those bleeds. So it is a very serious, do not AoE, have self-control. Merlin, I believe you had a question?
For classes that just have passive cleave and whatnot, would it be better to just move the boss away from that ad until it gets broken out?
Potentially. Again, the biggest thing is that a couple people will get, changed. So if those people get changed and they have enough damage to quickly break the shield, they can. However, if those people cannot break the shield before their debuff expires, they go back to being regular, and then 3 new players will become hostile. So if you're over, at the boss and you're hitting the boss and all of your abilities cleave, and suddenly the people that are MC'd are off on an island trying to break the shield and they don't break it, and then your friendly neighborhood warrior suddenly gets changed and you do a flame breath or a deep breath or whatever into the boss, and he suddenly got changed, you may in fact hurt them pretty bad. So just be aware that it's not like a guarantee. You can't predict who gets the change in status, but if you get the change, just try to break the shield as quickly as possible, and everyone else should try to single target and not AoE in that instance.
Is there no grace period once you change, or is it instantly the person can get hit?
From what I remember, because I had it literally one time during my testing, it is instantaneous. There is no grace period from when I tested it.
You're supposed to get it, and then you have a few seconds to get out before you actually turn hostile. There should be a little bit of a grace period, and it's on heroic and up. There's too many classes that have passive cleave. So if people don't passive cleave, they're just not going to do their damage at all. So you're probably just going to, if you're a melee and they keep this mechanic like it is, and you have the unfriendly debuff, after you break the shield, you're probably just going to have to go stand in nowhere, or you'll just die.
Yep.
There's no other way around it.
Yeah, that is very akin.
Wait, was this the fight that originally had the weird, class-specific stuff to it?
Yes, they completely removed it.
Oh, so they made it just as toxic meat.
Yeah.
So, the hope is that they fix it so you're not actually, hostile, but they may not actually make that change, because it's going to be real cringe, because a bunch of classes just can't not cleave. It's just their abilities.
That ignite is just going to bounce over to someone and they're just going to die.
Yeah. Yep. So those will be things that people have to be aware of, and we'll have to address it as we go through it. Again, we may not even see it the first week. We don't know. We may get stopped by their bosses. We really hope not. But that's a problem for when we actually see the boss. Phase 3, unless anyone else has any questions about P1 or P2. Okay, P3, for most people, don't know anything about P3 because it was very, very buggy. However, Temerity released their video about their kill on normal. Again, this is normal mechanics. There are no heroic mechanics added here. So heroic will even be harder and have extra things going on. But when you are killing this boss in normal, it will spawn a very, very tight pattern of walls. And they decided to start in the middle. I personally don't think that'll be the best strategy, but we'll have to figure it out and kind of play with it as we go. But you see, as the boss gets to the middle, you have a very small amount of space. As the boss gets close to these walls, he will eat them and spawn a portal. Every single time the boss moves around like it is now, it will consume the walls around and it will spawn portals. I believe on Heroic, these portals will despawn after a timer, so the boss positioning and movement has to be very calculated on Heroic. On Normal, they seem to last until they are used. Every portal will spawn a singular ad, while all of the other mechanics are going off. You can see that there are knockback mechanics. There's the tank soak that has the weird spirit thing. There's the swirlies, and every time that you break one of these walls, there's also swirlies. The biggest thing in this phase is if you break walls with this mechanic, like the Rushing Darkness, like this guy's about to, you lose walls, which means you lose portals, so your enrage time gets shorter every time you break a wall, like this guy did. What he did is a big no-no. In fact, he broke 2 walls. So that's 2 or 3 less portals that are usable. Every single time a portal spawns, an ad is spawned. These ads are pretty easy to deal with. They can be CC'd, and you can grip them in, you can stun them, you can slow them, whatever you need to do, but they can be cleaved down. It seemed that most people that were doing heroic testing opted to just try to kill the boss and not touch these ads at all because they really didn't do much, and they had way too much health. I don't know if that'll be the case in live, because we did not get adequate testing once patches and things were changed. But again, on heroic testing, we didn't even touch the ads, and then we just got overrun. On normal, it seems pretty clear that you can just cleave them down. The boss at some point will cast his Ebon Destruction. Ebon Destruction will kill you unless you are standing in a portal. If you guys did Rygalon in Sepulchre of the first ones, this is basically the same as Rygalon. If you do not stand in the portal, you are instantly killed. And I need to double check about how many people can be in a singular portal, but from my memory it was 3. Dungeon Journal says it's a different number, so we will need to actively double check our testing to make sure we know how many people can fit into a single portal, otherwise people will just die. But you see that he finishes his cast, anyone that is not standing in a portal instantly dies. People that are standing in portals will live, and those portals despawn. So this part of the phase, you're dealing with breaking walls, you're dealing with the big tank soaks, you're dealing with the red swirlies that you have to move away from people. People have big dots, you have to do very heavy cleave, and the tank has to slowly kite around the room to spawn good portals, and as good portals are spawned, you soak in the portals to make sure you do not die to his one-shot cast. His one-shot cast seems to be on a 30-second cooldown from testing. Dungeon Journal and Wowhead says it's 35. We'll have to wait and see really what it is, because there are some discrepancies in numbers. But you do this phase for a vast majority of the fight. This is where I would recommend to save your lust. And again, the biggest thing is your space management and not breaking walls until your tank moves. Because you can see that they're basically out of walls, and just a quick spoiler sneak peek. When they kill the boss, they have absolutely 0 portals left, and this is a US rank 32 guild from the previous tier. They almost wiped on normal to space management. Obviously, there are a lot of people dead, but this fight might be very, very difficult. So just keep that in mind, that in P3, do not break walls at any cost. P1 and P2, break walls as much as you fucking want. P3, do not break walls. On Mythic, again, it'll be do not break walls the entire time, but we will see that when we see that. I know that this isn't like a good raid plan, and I plan to make a raid plan once the Raider plan website has updated their information. But does anyone have any general questions about Echo of Neltharion? Okay. The last thing that I just wanted to at least touch on very briefly, there is basically 0 information on Sarkareth. There are no videos, there are no people that are saying that they've tested it or anything because it wasn't testable, but I do at least want to talk about the main portion of the fight. It is very similar to the P3 of Echo of Neltharion, so people just need to be aware that that is the biggest mechanic of the fight. The big mechanic that he has is he will open these phases in Oblivion. So if you soak a certain amount of mechanics, get 10 applications, you go in the emptiness between the stars. When you go into the emptiness between the stars, you have 20 seconds to recover your body, or you just instantly get one shot. And you can't really be damaged by anything, so there's no reason to, like, you know, not do this if a bad mechanic comes around, because you can ignore mechanics. The other thing is that when certain mechanics pick players, they can intentionally go into the emptiness between the stars and take the mechanic with them, and the rest of the raid doesn't have to deal with it. Also, for you super patters out there, this is something that we have to figure out the most correct way to do. There are these astral flares, where if you pick them up, you gain haste and movement speed, and they can be taken with you outside of the emptiness once you recover your body. So there may be a play for a certain class when they have their cooldowns to intentionally go into the emptiness, take a bunch of astral flares, recover their body, get a PI, and get an extra like 2 to 3 bloodlusts worth of haste bonus and movement speed bonus. Again, this is something that we have to double check and figure out, but that is the biggest part of the fight, where you get a really bad mechanic, you intentionally go into the other realm, the mechanic expires in the other realm, and then you go back to the main realm with a haste and movement speed buff. As far as the platform or anything about that, I don't have any resources about it other than just kind of speculation here. Technically, we could go and look at the map. It seems to be just a circular platform that you jump onto, but other than that, no clue what this boss is really going to hold. If you guys want to look through the dungeon journal, you're more than welcome to, and we, happily to facilitate open conversation, but I don't really have anything at this time for you guys. But that's technically every boss. Does anyone have any questions at this very moment about any of the bosses that we have gone over, from Kazara all the way down to Echo of Neltharion? Okay, I appreciate everyone that was willing to come out and listen to me rant for a while. I hope that this helps you guys get prepared. I hope you've taken notes. As a reminder, we do have a 10.1 Abberus channel set that has a bunch of channels. Every single one of these raid plans, I have posted these videos into them, or all of the resources. So if you want to go and look at them on your own time or prepare right before raid, all of these are available to you. Once Forgotten Experiments is correctly listed, and once Echo of Neltharion are correctly listed, I plan to have both of them posted, and I also plan to do a one for Starkareth as well for Normal and Heroic, as we see guilds doing them the first week. But that is all I have for today. So unless anyone has any other questions, I'm going to go ahead and turn off the stream and stop the recording.